In the opulent kingdom of Valdoria, where golden spires pierce azure skies and ancient bloodlines determine destiny, a devastating secret lurks beneath the crown's gleaming surface. When King Alexander's trusted guard stumbles upon encrypted financial records in the dead of night, he uncovers a web of deception that threatens to shatter the royal family forever. What begins as a routine security check becomes the catalyst for the most explosive royal scandal in Valdoria's thousand-year history. Blood may be thicker than water, but, in the halls of power, loyalty has a price, and some betrayals cut deeper than any sword. The autumn rain pelted against the towering windows of Valdoria's royal palace as Captain Marcus Thorne completed his final security rounds of the evening. 20 years of faithful service had taught him to notice the smallest details: a door left slightly ajar, shadows that fell incorrectly, the subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. Tonight, something was definitely amiss in the East Wing's financial quarters. The heavy oak door to Queen Consort Isabella's private office stood open, warm light spilling into the darkened corridor. Marcus frowned, checking his timepiece. Past midnight, and protocol demanded all administrative offices be secured by 10. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the ceremonial sword at his side, though he'd never drawn it in anger during his entire career. Inside the ornate office, papers were scattered across Isabella's mahogany desk in obvious haste. Marcus stepped carefully around the Persian rugs, his trained eye cataloging the disorder. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and what appeared to be coded correspondence lay abandoned as if someone had fled suddenly. The Queen Consort's personal computer remained active, its screen glowing with financial software he didn't recognize. A particular document caught his attention: a wire transfer authorization bearing the royal seal, dated just 3 days prior. The amount made him whistle low under his breath: 50 million Valdorian crowns, transferred to an account registered under a name he recognized with growing unease. Prince Adrian, the younger son who had been exiled from the kingdom 5 years ago following his scandalous affair and subsequent marriage to a commoner. Marcus's loyalty to the crown ran deeper than his own bloodline, but his sense of duty to King Alexander ran deeper still. The aging monarch had been like a father to him, promoting him from a common palace guard to captain of the royal security force. If someone was moving the kingdom's funds without the king's knowledge, Alexander needed to know immediately. The captain photographed the documents with his secure device, careful not to disturb their arrangement. As he worked, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. He quickly dimmed the office lights and pressed himself against the wall beside a towering bookshelf, watching as 2 figures appeared in the doorway. Queen Consort Isabella entered first, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Her dark hair had escaped its perfect arrangement, and her designer gown was wrinkled as if she'd been traveling. Behind her walked Lord Chancellor Maximilian Reeves, the king's most trusted advisor for over 2 decades. Both moved with the urgent precision of people operating under extreme pressure. "The transfers must be completed before dawn," Isabella whispered, moving directly to her computer. "If Alexander discovers what we've done before Adrian is safely established in Meridia, everything we've worked for will be destroyed." Lord Reeves nodded grimly, producing a small device from his jacket pocket. "This will encrypt all communications going forward. The king's investigators are more sophisticated than we anticipated, but they haven't traced the Cayman Island accounts yet." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. The Queen Consort and the Lord Chancellor were actively working against King Alexander, funneling royal treasury funds to the exiled prince. The implications staggered him. This wasn't simple embezzlement but a coordinated effort to undermine the crown itself. "Adrian sent word from his estate in Meridia," Isabella continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "He's gathering support among the displaced nobility there. With sufficient funding, he believes he can mount a legitimate challenge to Alexander's rule within 18 months. "And if he fails?" Reeves asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Isabella's laugh was cold and calculating. "Then, we ensure Prince William never lives to see his coronation. My son Dmitri has a far better claim to the throne, and, with Adrian's supporters behind him, the transition would be seamless." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Prince William, heir apparent and beloved by the people, was apparently marked for elimination. Princess Isabella, who had married into the royal family 12 years ago bringing her son from her first marriage, had been planning this coup for years. Marcus knew he possessed information that could save the kingdom, but he also understood the deadly game he'd stumbled into. Isabella and Reeves commanded significant resources and had clearly been planning this betrayal for years. One captain of guards, no matter how loyal, would be easy to eliminate if they suspected his knowledge. He remained motionless as they completed their work, transferring additional funds and coordinating what appeared to be a complex network of financial arrangements. They spoke of safe houses, loyal servants, and contingency plans that painted a picture of meticulous preparation. This wasn't a spontaneous betrayal but a carefully orchestrated revolution designed to topple King Alexander from within his own family. When they finally departed near dawn, Marcus waited another hour before emerging from his hiding place. His hands trembled slightly as he secured additional photographic evidence of their activities. The computer had been locked, but the papers remained, providing a clear trail of financial treachery that would convince even the most skeptical observer. The challenge now lay in approaching King Alexander without alerting the conspirators. Isabella and Reeves would be watching for any sign that their activities had been discovered, and Marcus understood that his own life hung in the balance. A single misstep would not only cost him everything but might also seal the fate of the royal family he had sworn to protect. As the first light of dawn crept through the palace windows, Captain Marcus Thorne began planning the most important mission of his career. The evidence in his possession could either save the kingdom of Valdoria or trigger a civil war that would destroy everything their ancestors had built over 1,000 years of proud history. The Game of Thrones had begun, and Marcus held the key that could determine who would ultimately wear the crown. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens as King Alexander stood at his private study window, his weathered hands gripping a cup of steaming coffee. At 68, the monarch retained the bearing of the military officer he'd once been, but the weight of ruling Valdoria for 30 years had etched deep lines around his steel-gray eyes. Today, those eyes would be tested as never before. Captain Thorne had requested an emergency private audience, using security protocols reserved for matters of the highest national importance. Alexander trusted Marcus implicitly. The man had saved his life twice during his younger years and had never once compromised the royal family's safety or secrets. Whatever brought him here at dawn carried serious implications. A discreet knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," Alexander called, settling behind his massive desk carved from Valdorian oak that had stood in this room for 2 centuries. Marcus entered with military precision, but Alexander immediately noticed the tension in his loyal captain's shoulders. 20 years of working together had taught him to read the subtle signs of stress in his security chief's demeanor. Today, Marcus carried himself like a man bearing terrible news. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, bowing formally before producing a sealed envelope from his jacket. "I've discovered information that threatens the security of the crown and the safety of your family. I must ask that you review these documents immediately and consider implementing emergency security protocols." Alexander accepted the envelope with growing concern. Inside, he found high-resolution photographs of financial documents, bank transfers, and correspondence that made his blood pressure spike dangerously. 50 million crowns transferred to accounts linked to his exiled younger son Adrian. The authorization bore Isabella's signature and the royal seal she was entitled to use as queen consort. "Where did you obtain these?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in his chest. Marcus related the previous night's discovery with clinical precision, omitting no detail of the conversation he'd witnessed between Isabella and Lord Reeves. As the captain spoke, Alexander felt the carefully constructed world of trust he'd built around himself crumbling piece by piece. Isabella, whom he'd married 12 years ago following his beloved first wife's death, had seemed to bring stability and purpose back to his life. She'd been a widow herself, bringing young Dmitri into their family while embracing her role as stepmother to William and Adrian. When Adrian's scandalous behavior had forced his exile, Isabella had been supportive and understanding, helping to maintain family unity during a difficult period. Now Alexander understood that her support had been calculated manipulation designed to position her own son as heir apparent while systematically undermining the legitimate royal line. "Lord Reeves," Alexander murmured, the betrayal cutting perhaps even deeper than his wife's treachery. Maximilian had been his closest friend since their university days, serving as best man at both of Alexander's weddings. They'd built modern Valdoria together, transforming it from a sleepy European principality into a thriving center of international commerce and culture. "I'm afraid there's more, Your Majesty," Marcus continued grimly. "They spoke of ensuring Prince William never reaches his coronation. I believe his life may be in immediate danger." Alexander's hand moved instinctively to his secure phone. William was currently in Geneva, representing Valdoria at a trade summit that wouldn't conclude for another 3 days. If Isabella and her conspirators were moving against him, time was critically short. "Triple William's security detail immediately," Alexander ordered. "Use only personnel from our original Valdorian families, no one who joined the service in the past 15 years. And, Marcus, this conversation never happened until I determine our next moves." The captain nodded and withdrew, leaving Alexander alone with the devastating evidence of his family's betrayal. The financial documents revealed a pattern of systematic theft spanning nearly 3 years. Isabella had been using her access to royal accounts to fund not only Adrian's exile lifestyle but also what appeared to be a sophisticated network of support throughout Valdoria's neighboring countries. Alexander reached for his private line to the royal treasury, summoning his most trusted financial advisor. Within an hour, Chief Treasury Officer Elena Volkov sat across from him, her face pale as she reviewed the evidence. "Your Majesty, if these transfers are accurate, nearly 200 million crowns have been diverted from our national reserves," Elena reported, her voice shaking slightly. "The Queen Consort has been using emergency authorization protocols you established for natural disasters and national emergencies. Can the transfers be reversed?" "Some of them, potentially, but the accounts appear to be structured through multiple international banks with privacy protections. It would require coordinated legal action across several jurisdictions and could take months." Alexander made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "Freeze every account accessible to Queen Consort Isabella immediately. Revoke all her financial authorizations and establish new protocols that require my personal approval for any transfer exceeding 100,000 crowns." Elena hesitated. "Your Majesty, such actions will be immediately apparent to the Queen Consort. If she's involved in the conspiracy Captain Thorne described, freezing her accounts might accelerate whatever timeline they're operating under." "Then, we accelerate our own timeline," Alexander replied with cold determination. "Schedule an emergency session of the Privy Council for this afternoon. Include only members who have served our family for more than 20 years, and ensure the meeting location remains confidential until the last possible moment." As Elena departed to implement his orders, Alexander contemplated the devastating scope of the conspiracy he faced. Isabella wasn't simply stealing money, she was systematically positioning herself to control Valdoria's future by eliminating the legitimate heirs and installing her son as a puppet ruler she could manipulate from behind the scenes. The irony wasn't lost on him that his marriage to Isabella, intended to provide stability for the kingdom following his first wife's death, had instead introduced the greatest threat the monarchy had faced since the civil wars of the 14th century. Alexander activated his secure communication system and placed a call to Prince William in Geneva. His eldest son needed to understand immediately that his life was in danger and that the very foundations of their royal house were under attack. "Father?" William's voice came through clearly, tinged with concern at receiving a secure call during a diplomatic function. "William, listen carefully. Do not return to Valdoria as scheduled. Extend your stay in Geneva indefinitely and increase your security presence immediately. I'm sending Captain Thorne's most trusted men to supplement your detail within 6 hours." "What's happened?" Alexander took a deep breath, preparing to shatter his son's trust in their family as completely as his own had been destroyed. "We've discovered evidence that Isabella and several others are planning to overthrow the monarchy. Your life may be in immediate danger, and I need you safely out of the kingdom until we can neutralize this threat." The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds before William responded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What do you need me to do?" The question filled Alexander with pride even as his heart broke for the burden he was placing on his heir's shoulders. William's immediate focus on duty rather than personal safety confirmed that he would indeed make a worthy king if he lived to claim his birthright. Prince William stood on the balcony of his suite at the Grand Hotel Kempinski in Geneva, watching the sun set over Lake Geneva while processing the earth-shattering information his father had shared. At 34, he'd served his country with distinction as a diplomat, soldier, and heir apparent, but nothing had prepared him for the revelation that his stepmother was actively plotting his assassination. The trade summit had concluded successfully just hours earlier, with Valdoria securing several lucrative partnerships that would strengthen their economy for decades to come. Now, instead of returning home to celebrate these victories, he found himself essentially in exile, protected by a hastily assembled security team while his father dismantled a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of their government. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Captain Thorne. Additional intelligence confirms immediate threat. New evidence suggests timeline accelerated due to your extended absence. Recommend maintaining distance until kingdom secured. William forwarded the message to his personal assistant, David Chen, a brilliant Oxford graduate who'd been managing his diplomatic affairs for 6 years. David's discretion and intelligence had proven invaluable during delicate international negotiations, and William trusted him with secrets that could reshape European politics. "Sir," David said, entering the suite with his characteristic calm efficiency, "I've reviewed the security briefings Captain Thorne provided. The situation appears more complex than initially reported." William gestured for him to continue while pouring 2 glasses of Swiss wine from the diplomatic gift they'd received that morning. "Our intelligence suggests that Prince Adrian has been building more than just financial support in Meridia," David continued, consulting his secure tablet. "Satellite imagery shows unusual activity at his estate, construction projects that appear defensive in nature, increased personnel, and regular visits from individuals with military backgrounds." The implications were staggering. Adrian wasn't simply living in comfortable exile, he was building the infrastructure necessary to mount a military challenge to Alexander's rule. Isabella's financial support had funded not just personal luxury but preparation for actual warfare. "There's more, sir." Cross-referencing financial records with travel logs suggests that several Valdorian military officers have visited Adrian's estate over the past 18 months. Officers who currently hold senior positions in our armed forces. William felt the wine turn bitter in his mouth. The conspiracy wasn't limited to financial theft and political maneuvering, it had infected the military establishment itself. If significant portions of Valdoria's armed forces were compromised, his father might not possess the resources necessary to defend the legitimate government. "How many officers are we discussing?" "At least a dozen confirmed visits, possibly more using unofficial channels." The visitors include Colonel Andreas Muller, commander of the Northern Garrison, and General Patricia Kozlov, who oversees our Special Operations Forces. Both names hit William like physical blows. Mueller had been a family friend for 15 years, dining regularly at the palace and serving as one of William's military mentors during his service years. General Kozlov had been instrumental in modernizing Valdoria's military, transforming them from a ceremonial force into a competent modern army capable of defending their sovereignty. William activated his secure communication link to the palace, but, instead of connecting to his father's line, he found himself speaking with Marcus Thorne directly. "Your Highness, King Alexander is currently in emergency session with the Privy Council," Marcus reported. "The situation has deteriorated rapidly since this morning's revelations." "How rapidly?" "Queen Consort Isabella disappeared from the palace approximately 2 hours ago. Her personal guards claim she departed for a routine charity engagement, but our investigation reveals no such engagement was scheduled. Her limousine was tracked to the private airfield where the royal jet was fueled and filed a flight plan for an undisclosed international destination." William's blood ran cold. Isabella's flight meant the conspiracy had moved from planning to execution phase. If she was fleeing Valdoria, it suggested that whatever timeline they'd been operating under had been drastically accelerated. Furthermore, Marcus continued, "We've detected unusual troop movements in the northern provinces. Several military units have departed their regular positions under orders that originated from compromised officers. King Alexander has activated emergency protocols and recalled all loyal forces to defensive positions around the capital." The reality of civil war settled over William like a suffocating blanket. Valdoria, which had enjoyed peaceful prosperity for decades, was now teetering on the edge of violent internal conflict. His family's betrayal of each other would spill blood across the kingdom they'd sworn to protect. "Captain,"
What are my father's orders? Remain in Geneva until further notice.
The king is implementing contingency plans that may require your succession under emergency circumstances.
Your safety is paramount to the kingdom's future stability.
The conversation ended, leaving William alone with David and the crushing weight of potential kingship thrust upon him through violence rather than natural succession. His father was only 68 and, in excellent health under normal circumstances, William expected to serve as heir apparent for another decade or more.
David approached the conversation carefully.
"Sir, if I may suggest, perhaps we should consider reaching out to Prince Adrian directly." William looked at him sharply.
"Explain."
"Your brother may not fully understand the scope of what's been planned in his name. If Queen Isabella has been manipulating him as thoroughly as she manipulated your father, he might be willing to negotiate rather than proceed with armed conflict." The suggestion had merit, but it also carried enormous risks.
Adrian had always been impulsive and easily influenced, traits that had led to his exile in the first place.
If Isabella had been feeding him false information about their father's intentions or the kingdom's political situation, he might genuinely believe he was fighting for justice rather than participating in a treasonous rebellion. Additionally, David continued, direct communication with Prince Adrian might provide intelligence about the conspiracy's true scope and timeline. If we can determine their exact plans, we might be able to develop countermeasures that prevent bloodshed.
William weighed the options carefully.
Contacting Adrian would violate his father's direct orders to maintain distance and security, but it might also provide the key to resolving the crisis without civil war.
The prince who would someday rule Valdoria needed to make decisions based on the kingdom's best interests rather than personal safety. Draft a message to Adrian, William decided.
Keep it simple and direct, a request for private conversation between brothers without political intermediaries. If Isabella is manipulating him, we need to understand exactly what she's told him about our family's situation.
As David began composing the message, William returned to the balcony overlooking Lake Geneva.
The peaceful Swiss landscape contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding in his homeland, but he understood that his exile here might be temporary. Within days, he could be either a king ascending a throne defended by loyal forces or a pretender fleeing from a successful coup orchestrated by his own stepmother. The Game of Thrones had indeed begun, and William was preparing to play for the highest stakes imaginable, not just his own life, but the future of the kingdom he'd been born to rule. In the war room deep beneath Valdoria's royal palace, King Alexander stood before a massive digital map displaying real-time positions of military units across the kingdom. Red markers indicated forces of questionable loyalty, while blue showed units that remained steadfast to the crown. The balance was disturbingly close to equal. General Harrison Vale, the kingdom's most senior military officer and one of the few Alexander still trusted completely, pointed to concerning developments along the northern border. At 72, Vale had served 3 generations of Valdorian royalty with unwavering devotion, and his strategic mind remained as sharp as ever. Your Majesty, intelligence confirms that Prince Adrian has crossed into Valdorian territory with approximately 2,000 mercenaries and sympathizers, Vale reported grimly. They've established positions in the Thornwood Valley, effectively cutting off road access to the capital from 3 northern provinces. Alexander studied the tactical display with the eye of a former military officer. Adrian had chosen his position well. The Thornwood Valley's natural defenses made it nearly impregnable to frontal assault, while its strategic location allowed him to control crucial supply lines and communication routes.
Casualties so far? Alexander asked.
Minimal, sire. Both sides appear to be avoiding direct confrontation while positioning for advantage. However, Colonel Muller's defection has delivered the northern garrison's armory to Adrian's forces, significantly enhancing their military capabilities. The betrayal of officers Alexander had considered family cut deeper than any physical wound. Mueller had been decorated for valor during the border conflicts of the previous decade, earning his colonel's rank through courage and competence. Now that same expertise served a rebellion against everything he'd once sworn to protect. Lord Chancellor Maximilian Reeves entered the war room with obvious reluctance, his face pale and drawn. The evidence of his involvement in the conspiracy was irrefutable, but Alexander had chosen to keep him close rather than risk driving him to open alliance with Adrian's forces. Your Majesty, Reeves began carefully, I've received communication from Queen Consort Isabella through intermediaries. She's requesting an opportunity to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this crisis."
Alexander's laugh held no humor.
"The woman who stole 200 million crowns and fled the kingdom in the night now wishes to negotiate?
What terms does she propose?"
"Abdication in favor of Prince Dmitri, with yourself and Prince William accorded honored retirement status and full royal privileges. In exchange, all parties would receive amnesty, and the kingdom would avoid civil war." The audacity of the proposal staggered Alexander, but he recognized Isabella's cunning in making it.
To the outside world, her terms would appear reasonable, a bloodless transition that preserved the monarchy while ending the immediate crisis.
Only those who knew the full scope of her treachery would understand that accepting meant rewarding theft, conspiracy, and planned murder with ultimate victory.
"And if I refuse?" Reeves hesitated before responding.
She suggests that the alternative would be prolonged conflict resulting in significant casualties and potential intervention by neighboring powers.
Alexander understood the implicit threat. Isabella had been building relationships with foreign governments for years, positioning herself as a stabilizing influence in regional politics. If civil war erupted in Valdoria, she could potentially secure international recognition for Adrian's government while portraying Alexander's forces as illegitimate obstacles to peace. "Lord Reeves," Alexander said with deceptive calm, "you will inform Isabella that her terms are rejected completely. Furthermore, you will convey my counterproposal: immediate return of all stolen funds, unconditional surrender of Adrian's forces, and voluntary exile for all conspirators. In exchange, I will commute death sentences for treason to permanent banishment." Reeves paled further. "Your Majesty, I fear such terms will only escalate." "You fear correctly," Alexander interrupted. "Because you helped create this situation through your betrayal of oaths sworn to my family and this kingdom. Your choice now lies between attempting to minimize the damage you've caused or facing execution for high treason." The threat wasn't idle. Alexander had already signed preliminary warrants authorizing extreme measures to preserve royal authority. If the conspiracy couldn't be resolved through negotiation, he was prepared to use every legal and military tool at his disposal to crush it completely. General Vale consulted his secure communication device before addressing both men. "Your Majesty, Prince William reports that he's established contact with Prince Adrian through unofficial channels. The brothers are attempting direct negotiation without political intermediaries." Alexander felt a mixture of pride and terror at his heir's initiative. William's diplomatic skills were exceptional, and his personal relationship with Adrian might indeed provide a path to peaceful resolution. However, any direct contact between the princes also exposed William to assassination attempts or kidnapping efforts that could eliminate the legitimate succession entirely. "What intelligence do we have on Adrian's state of mind?" Alexander asked. "Reports suggest confusion rather than malicious intent," Vale replied carefully. "Several defectors from his camp indicate he believes you've been planning to disinherit him permanently and that Isabella convinced him Prince William intended to have him eliminated upon succession." The revelation hit Alexander with stunning force. Isabella hadn't simply stolen money and planned William's assassination, she'd systematically poison Adrian against his own family using carefully crafted lies that played on his insecurities and past conflicts with the royal court. Adrian had always struggled with his position as second son, feeling overshadowed by William's natural leadership abilities and struggling to find his own meaningful role in the kingdom's future. Isabella had exploited those vulnerabilities masterfully, presenting herself as Adrian's protector while gradually isolating him from family relationships that might have revealed her deceptions. If William can convince Adrian that he's been manipulated, Alexander mused, the rebellion might collapse without significant bloodshed. Alternatively, General Vale noted grimly, if Isabella recognizes the threat posed by direct communication between the princes, she might accelerate plans for eliminating Prince William before reconciliation becomes possible. Alexander made a decision that would define his reign's legacy. Deploy our most elite protective units to Geneva immediately. William needs to know he has the option of returning to Valdorian territory under maximum security if his negotiations with Adrian progress successfully. And if the negotiations fail? Alexander looked at the tactical display showing enemy forces positioned throughout his kingdom's northern regions.
Red markers indicated not just military units but the systematic betrayal of trust that had defined his relationship with Isabella and many of his closest advisors. Then, we remind everyone why the House of Valdoria has ruled this kingdom for 1,000 years, he said quietly.
Some traditions are worth defending with blood.
The war room fell silent except for the quiet hum of electronic equipment monitoring a kingdom balanced on the knife's edge between peace and civil war.
Alexander understood that the next 48 hours would determine whether Valdoria emerged stronger from this crisis or fractured into competing factions that might never heal their differences. In Geneva, William was gambling everything on brotherly love overcoming political manipulation.
In the northern valleys, Adrian was positioning forces for what could become the bloodiest conflict in Valdorian history. And, somewhere beyond the kingdom's borders, Isabella was orchestrating events with the cold calculation that had brought them all to this moment of crisis. The Game of Thrones was reaching its climax, and only one faction would survive with their power intact. The private jet carrying Prince William touched down at a secured military airfield 30 kilometers outside Valdoria's capital just as dawn broke over the snow-capped mountains surrounding the kingdom. Despite his father's concerns about security, William had decided that resolving the crisis required face-to-face negotiations that couldn't be conducted from Swiss exile. Captain Marcus Thorne waited on the tarmac with a convoy of armored vehicles and 24 elite guards selected personally for their loyalty to the crown. The captain's usually composed demeanor showed strained dark circles under his eyes and tension lines that spoke of sleepless nights coordinating security while the kingdom teetered on the edge of civil war. "Your Highness," Marcus said with a crisp bow as William descended from the aircraft, "King Alexander has instructed me to escort you directly to the secure facility where Prince Adrian is waiting. The meeting location has been changed 3 times overnight due to security concerns."
William nodded grimly as they entered the lead vehicle.
Through the bulletproof windows, he could see evidence of the kingdom's crisis: military checkpoints, increased patrols, and civilian traffic reduced to essential movement only.
Valdoria hadn't seen such security measures since the terrorist threats of the early 2000s. "What's Adrian's current disposition?" William asked as they drove through increasingly familiar countryside toward the capital.
"Cooperative but suspicious," Marcus replied. "He arrived 6 hours ago with minimal security, suggesting genuine interest in negotiation. However, our intelligence indicates that Isabella has been feeding him false information about your intentions and your father's health for months." The revelation didn't surprise William, but it added complexity to negotiations that were already fraught with danger. If Adrian genuinely believed his family had been plotting against him, his anger and defensiveness would be based on perceived betrayals rather than actual grievances. Their destination proved to be Ravenshollow Castle, a medieval fortress that had been converted into a secure government facility during the Cold War. Its stone walls and isolated location provided both historical symbolism and practical security advantages for sensitive discussions. Inside the castle's main hall, Prince Adrian stood with his back to the entrance, studying a tapestry depicting the Battle of Thornwick where their ancestors had first established Valdorian independence. At 31, Adrian retained the athletic build of his military service years, but his posture conveyed exhaustion and stress that aged him beyond his years. When he turned to face William, the brothers' eyes met for the first time in nearly 2 years. Adrian's expression mixed anger, hurt, and desperate hope in equal measure, the look of someone who wanted to believe reconciliation was possible while fearing additional betrayal. "Brother," William said simply, removing his jacket and approaching with open hands to demonstrate peaceful intentions.
"William."
Adrian's voice carried carefully controlled emotion.
"I wasn't certain you'd actually come."
They embraced briefly, and William felt some of the tension leave his brother's shoulders.
Whatever poisonous lies Isabella had planted between them, the fundamental bond of shared childhood and family loyalty remained intact.
"Adrian, we need to discuss what Isabella has told you about our family's intentions," William began, settling into one of the chairs that had been arranged around a small table. "Because I suspect much of it has been deliberately distorted to serve her own purposes."
Adrian's expression hardened. "She saved my life, William.
When father was planning to have me eliminated for embarrassing the family, Isabella warned me and helped arrange my escape." The words hit William like a physical blow. Isabella had convinced Adrian that Alexander had ordered his assassination, a lie so monstrous that it revealed the true scope of her manipulative abilities. Adrian, father never planned to harm you. Yes, your marriage and the circumstances surrounding it created diplomatic complications, but exile was intended to allow the scandal to fade, not to eliminate you permanently.
Then, why were military units positioned near my estate in Meridia just weeks before Isabella warned me?
William recognized the trap Isabella had constructed. Valdorian special forces had indeed been operating near Adrian's estate, but their mission involved protecting him from terrorist organizations that had threatened to kidnap him for ransom. Isabella had reframed protective operations as assassination preparations.
Those units were providing security, William explained. We received credible threats from criminal organizations seeking to exploit your isolated position. Father authorized protective operations specifically to ensure your safety.
Adrian's certainty wavered, but years of carefully constructed mistrust weren't easily overcome. Isabella showed me financial records proving that father had been diverting funds meant for my support.
William felt pieces of the conspiracy clicking into place with devastating clarity.
Isabella hadn't simply stolen money, she'd used the theft to create false evidence of their father's betrayal while positioning herself as Adrian's only reliable ally. She stole those funds herself, William said quietly. Over 200 million crowns diverted through accounts she controlled. The evidence has been reviewed by independent auditors and law enforcement agencies. Isabella has been systematically looting the royal treasury while making it appear that father was stealing from you.
The color drained from Adrian's face as the implications became clear.
If William was telling the truth, then everything Isabella had told him was lies designed to manipulate him into betraying his own family. Why would she do this? To position her son Dmitri as heir apparent while eliminating both of us from succession, William replied. She's been planning this for years, building support among disaffected nobles and military officers while gradually isolating us from each other. Adrian stood and walked to the window overlooking the castle's courtyard, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. She convinced me you were planning to have me killed once you became king. Never, William said firmly, joining his brother at the window.
You're my brother, Adrian.
We've had our differences and conflicts, but I would never harm you. Nor would father, despite everything that's happened. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching clouds gather over the mountains that surrounded their homeland. Finally, Adrian spoke with a voice heavy with shame and regret. I've brought armed forces across our border based on lies.
How many people will die because I was too foolish to see through her manipulations? None, if we act quickly, William replied.
Your forces respect you and will follow your orders. If you stand down the rebellion and publicly expose Isabella's deceptions, we can end this without bloodshed. Adrian turned to face his brother with tears in his eyes.
Can father forgive me? Can the kingdom forgive what I've done? William clasped his brother's shoulder. Father loves you, Adrian.
He always has, even when he couldn't understand your choices.
As for the kingdom, they'll remember that you chose family over false promises when the truth was revealed. The reunion that followed was interrupted by urgent communication from Captain Thorne.
Your Highnesses, intelligence reports indicate that Queen Consort Isabella has landed at the northern airfield with what appears to be foreign military advisors. She may be preparing a final attempt to salvage her plans. William and Adrian exchanged glances, understanding that their reconciliation had come almost too late. Isabella still commanded significant resources and desperate people often made dangerous decisions. Then, we finish this together, Adrian said with the determination that had once made him an effective military officer. As brothers, as Valdorians, and as the sons of King Alexander.
Within hours, Prince Adrian would address his assembled forces, explaining Isabella's deceptions and ordering their immediate stand-down.
The rebellion that had threatened to tear Valdoria apart would end not with battle, but with the restoration of family bonds that had proved stronger than political manipulation. Isabella's conspiracy had failed, but the kingdom would bear scars from her betrayal for years to come. The House of Valdoria would survive, but it would be forever changed by the realization that their greatest threats could come from within their own family circle. The Game of Thrones was ending, but the lessons learned would reshape how Valdoria's royal family approached trust, loyalty, and the eternal vigilance required to preserve their ancient crown.